The world today is more connected than ever before. We live in an age of unprecedented technological advancement, where artificial intelligence, automation, and global trade have reshaped the way societies function. But beneath this progress lies a growing divide, one that threatens the very fabric of global stability. That divide is the wealth gap. From New York to Nairobi, from Mumbai to Madrid, the rich are growing richer at an astonishing pace, while the middle class shrinks and the poor are left to struggle. What happens if this wealth gap keeps growing? What if inequality continues to deepen until the richest few control almost everything and the rest of humanity is left with crumbs? The consequences of such a future are not just economic, they are social, political, environmental, and deeply human. At first glance, inequality may seem like a distant concern. After all, some level of inequality has always existed. There have always been kings and peasants, aristocrats and workers, CEOs and laborers. But today's wealth gap is different, not just in degree, but in scale. The top 1% of the global population owns more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. In some countries, billionaires see their fortunes grow by billions during economic crises, while millions are thrown into poverty, unable to afford rent, food, or health care. In the United States, the richest Americans have seen their net worth multiply exponentially, even as wages for the average worker have stagnated for decades. This disparity isn't accidental. It is the result of decades of policy choices, corporate practices, and systemic imbalances. Tax systems have been tilted in favor of the wealthy. Corporations use offshore tax havens, lobbying to weaken regulations and drive up profits. Workers have lost bargaining power. Unions have been dismantled, and social safety nets have been gutted. Meanwhile, access to quality education, healthcare, and housing remains wildly unequal. As automation and AI take over more jobs, the trend accelerates. Productivity rises, but workers see none of the rewards. Capital gains grow, wages do not. If this trajectory continues, the consequences will be devastating. First, consider the social impact. As the wealth gap widens, social mobility vanishes. It becomes harder for people born into poverty to escape it. Children from poor families struggle to access quality education, nutritious food, or stable housing. They grow up with limited opportunities, often trapped in a cycle of disadvantage. In contrast, the children of the wealthy inherit not just money, but connections, resources, and access. Society begins to harden into rigid classes where birth, not talent or effort, determines one's future. This entrenched inequality breeds resentment and frustration. When people feel the system is rigged, when they work 2 or 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet, while billionaires fly to space for fun, it creates anger. That anger can boil over into protests, civil unrest, and even violent revolution. History offers countless examples: the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the uprisings in Latin America. When inequality becomes extreme, it becomes unsustainable. In democratic societies, deepening inequality erodes the foundations of democracy itself. Political power follows economic power. The ultra-rich use their wealth to influence elections, lobby lawmakers, and shape public policy. Campaigns become dependent on billionaire donors. Media outlets are bought by the wealthy, shaping narratives and silencing dissent. Ordinary citizens feel their voices are drowned out. Trust in institutions erodes, voter turnout drops. Populist leaders exploit the anger, offering simple solutions to complex problems, often targeting scapegoats rather than addressing the root causes. As inequality grows, even the wealthy are not immune from its fallout. A society marked by extreme disparity becomes unstable. Crime rises as desperation grows. Gated communities, private security, and armored vehicles become the norm among the rich, but safety becomes an illusion. The economy suffers too. When most people have little disposable income, demand for goods and services declines. Innovation slows, talent goes unrecognized. Markets become saturated with luxury goods while basic needs remain unmet. On a global scale, the inequality between countries is also dangerous. Developed nations hoard vaccines, technology, and capital, while developing nations struggle with debt, unemployment, and climate disasters. Wealthy countries build walls, literal and metaphorical, to keep out refugees, migrants, and the consequences of their own consumption. But walls can't stop pandemics, rising seas, or climate-induced migration. As inequality fuels instability, the global system becomes increasingly fragile. Now, let's talk about mental and physical health. Numerous studies have shown that inequality is toxic to well-being. In societies with extreme disparities, people experience more stress, anxiety, and depression. The constant comparison, the sense of inadequacy, the lack of control over one's life, all of it takes a toll. Life expectancy drops, communities fragment, social cohesion erodes. Even those who are well off feel the pressure, the fear of losing status, the paranoia of a system that rewards hoarding and punishes empathy. And then there's climate change. The wealthiest individuals and corporations are responsible for a disproportionate share of emissions. Yet it is the poor who suffer the most from floods, droughts, and extreme weather. Inequality undermines climate action because those with the most power to change things have the least incentive. Why would a billionaire living in a climate-controlled mansion care about rising temperatures? Why would a corporation profiting from fossil fuels stop when short-term gains outweigh long-term survival? So, what happens if the wealth gap continues to grow unchecked? We move toward a dystopian future. Imagine a world where a handful of trillionaires own most of the planet's resources, where cities are divided into high-tech enclaves for the rich and decaying slums for the rest, where education is privatized, healthcare is a luxury, and democracy is a facade. Surveillance, private armies, and data control replace civic engagement, public service, and transparency. Technology becomes a tool of control rather than liberation. But this future is not inevitable. The good news is that inequality is not a natural law, it is the result of choices, and it can be changed with different ones. Progressive taxation, universal health care, investment in public education, and strong labor protections can reverse the tide. Technology can be harnessed for shared prosperity, not just corporate profit. Basic income, wealth taxes, and carbon dividends are not utopian fantasies. They are practical policies supported by economists, activists, and even some billionaires. We must also rethink what we value. Success should not be measured solely by profit margins or GDP. Well-being, sustainability, community, these must matter too. Corporations must be held accountable to workers, not just shareholders. Governments must serve all citizens, not just donors. And citizens must demand more of their leaders, their institutions, and themselves. Inequality cannot be solved by charity alone. Philanthropy, while valuable, does not replace justice. Billionaire donations, however generous, do not absolve systems that extract far more than they give. Real change comes through structural transformation, through organizing, voting, activism, and solidarity. The powerful do not give up privilege easily. History shows that progress requires struggle. We must also recognize the role of race, gender, and history in shaping inequality. Colonialism, slavery, patriarchy, and racism are not relics of the past. They live on in economic systems, housing patterns, and corporate hierarchies. Addressing inequality means addressing these legacies. It means listening to marginalized voices, redistributing power, and confronting uncomfortable truths. In the end, the question is not just what if the wealth gap keeps growing, but what kind of world do we want to live in? A world divided by walls and fear, or one united by justice and dignity? A world where a few live like gods and the rest struggle to survive? Or one where everyone has a fair shot at a good life? The choice is ours. The future is not written in stone, but time is running out. Every year the gap grows wider. Every crisis, from pandemics to recessions, accelerates the divide. If we don't act now, we may reach a point of no return. A world so unequal that reform becomes impossible and revolution becomes inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the capacity to build a fairer world. What we need is the will. A society that lets inequality spiral out of control is one that ultimately undermines its own foundation. But a society that chooses inclusion, fairness, and balance can thrive, not just economically, but culturally, spiritually, and humanely. So ask yourself, what side of history will you be on? The side that watched inequality grow and did nothing? Or the side that stood up, spoke out, and helped reshape the future?